Welcome to Shred Show, I'm Chris, and this is the internet's most stoked surfboard show. Shout out to Kaipo on Oahu, you asked for the Double Agent by Dan Mann and Firewire Surfboards. Ben Haviland, we're sending you a Mariner Tide Watch courtesy of Freestyle. And Murray Logan in Cape Town, South Africa, we're sending you some sandals to make your feet smile. So yesterday morning, my girlfriend saw this board and told me that it reminds her of what she calls my other fat board, the Baked Potato. She doesn't surf or know who Dan Mann is, but to me, this definitely looks like it's an evolution of Dan's potato boards, even though there's obviously a lot going on in this thing to claim there's like a missing link in the DNA between this and his older shapes. Go to a surf shop and look at the foil on this board, and you'll probably find it's more thinned out towards the tail than any other board you've seen. That thinness back here can be useful if you want to feel as if you're surfing down in the water, biting and digging into it. Because when a board is thinner back here like this, it becomes easier to sink when compared to a tail that would be thicker, making you surf more on top of the water with less bite and more slide. Now those boards with more thickness in the tail, like Dan's Sweet or Baked Potato, often require the use of bigger fins like AIPA twin fins or Merrick AMTs to give all of that thickness in the tail more grip in the water during bottom turns and cutbacks. But in this board here, that thinned out tail is likely a hint that you don't have to put as much fin in this board as you do those other boards, and it's also a clue that this board might have more hold and grip to the water than what so much width would imply. When I'm surfing this board, I notice that thin tail most during bottom turns because of all the drive that it adds to this shape, and I also notice it up in the lip because of how easy it is on a stomach high wave to push down on the tail, pause up in a mushy lip, and re-angle the board back down towards the trough for another bottom turn than it would be if this tail was thicker. The danger in thinning out a foil this way is that it creates potential for an unbalanced board because of how it could put all of the foam in the forward half of the board and none in the back because of how thin it's getting in the tail. But looking at the outline on this board, we can see that the widest point of it is pulled back a couple inches from center, and that helps add volume in the width of the board where it otherwise lacks it in the foil. Often shapers will bring the widest point of a surfboard forward in an attempt to make paddling easier and to suit front-footed surfers because of the way that it brings volume in the board up to where your chest is or where your front foot is. But looking now at the foil in the front half of this board, we can see that the thickest part of this surfboard is probably a couple inches in front of the halfway point. So we get our ability to surf on this board front-footed and our ease of paddling from the thickness up here, where the board is still really wide, even though the widest point of the board happens to be a couple inches behind center. Looking at the rocker on this board, the nose rocker looks pretty moderate, but the tail rocker, when you look at it closely, is much more than what you'd expect, partially due to everything that we just talked about. You see, in order to get from really thick up here to really thin back here, this deck slowly shaves off volume as it goes back towards the tail, getting thinner from up on top of the board, but that's nothing compared to how quickly the board shaves off volume from the bottom of the board as it goes back towards the tail. As the board thins out, it also increases the rocker by default, and the easiest way to understand that is to imagine what would happen if magically this tail right now as you're watching got thicker from the bottom, because if the tail ended like right here instead of right here, that would mean that there was less curve that the rocker had to make to get to this point as opposed to this point. Really deep double concave with an enormous V-spine here happening through the center. Double concave continues, really deep, right out to a flat, right out the end of the tail. This has got to be the deepest, longest double concave that we've seen on Shred Show. And when we look at how deep it is on either side of the double concave, coupled with how thick the board is along the V-spine here, it seems like a wonderful complement to the foil that we just talked about, because this kind of an aggressive double concave, which you can probably see easy in the lights like this, is something that will help add elements of slide to the thinness of the tail back here, and it will also add maneuverability to the front half of the board, helping it get rail to rail, where it would otherwise be difficult because of how wide the board is up front. Lastly, it helps with speed, because when you add depth of concave to the bottom of a surfboard, especially as deep as the concaves are on this board from nose to tail, that increases lift, which helps a surfboard go faster. And in the case of this board, which clearly has double concave all the way from the entry all the way back to the exit, that equals a lot of lift happening across the entire hull of this surfboard as it moves forward on water. Now, some shapers like Ellis Erickson in Bali like to focus on one element of their boards at a time, for example, spending like half a year perfecting the ideal rocker template, and then spending months and years keeping that rocker template exactly the same while experimenting with damn near everything else on their surfboards. The idea that some shapers follow is that if you slowly and incrementally improve each small aspect of your shapes, you end up 10 years from now with the perfect surfboard. Looking at this board and other boards that Dan has made, you get the impression that he uses his rail design as a foundation and a starting point for a lot of his shaping, and then experiments with other elements from board to board. Effectively, what he's done is found a way to decrease the length of his boards drastically without compromising the effective shape of his rails right at the point where they make contact with the water. He does that by bringing volume straight out from where the stringer would be on this board if it had a stringer, and then dramatically angling it down right where it counts to get to his effective rail shape. If you look at his boards closely, you often find that the line he draws here on his rails coincides in parallel with the line that he draws from the deepest point of his concave as it angles down to meet the bottom of the rail, making two parallel lines like this sort of angling down into the water. Essentially what this does is it allows most of his boards that he uses this rail design on to feel abnormally fluid going from rail to rail when you consider how short they are, or how wide they are, or how packed full of volume that they are. I think that the double agent is an improvement to the maneuverability of a baked potato, with more options in this board for going up and down in the pocket, where a baked potato would just want to book it for the shoulder and then do a cutback. I'd place this board in between a performance groveler on one end, like number 4, with an emphasis on small wave ripping at the cost of paddling, and a sweet or baked potato on the other end, with emphasis on fun and float at the sacrifice of a little bit of maneuverability in the pocket and the lip. When I surf this board, I get really good drive off the bottom with an AM2 4-fin setup, and this board definitely feels to me like a really fun, low volume, high surface area kind of a ride. When you're surfing it, you can almost feel just how thin it is at the deep point of the concaves. I surf it in the middle of my volume range in high tide beach breaks that would normally call for the high side of my volume range, and I think anyone would be stoked on one of these boards in waves ranging from zippy 3-foot beach break to head-high mush burgers on the other end. If you live in California near Cardiff by the sea, you'll be able to demo one of these alongside the rest of Firewire's range at Surf Ride's Camp Shred at the San Elijo campgrounds today and tomorrow on Sunday. For more on that, check the info below. To possibly make your feet happy with a brand new pair of Block Party sandals from Sanook, drop a comment beneath this video telling us what your favorite board to surf is in small waves. Is it a longboard? Is it a hand plane? Whatever it is, tell us what it is in the comments below. We hope the waves are up at whatever ocean, rapid, or lake that you live next to, and we will see you next week on Shred Show.